All right, it actually did come up here. All right, so Grace, I'm putting you there, or you can sit right there if you want. Be more in the action. Okay, Kat, you want to move up a seat? Cool. All right, folks. Either you'll need something to take notes. Actually, that World War II timeline. We're finishing that today. So, however you're taking notes, it's just borderline possible right now to get through this, but we have to because I want to have some time on Thursday to review, to have our test Friday, and so we got to finish a horde of content. To get everybody in here on Zoom. Hello, folks. Hope you are doing well. Welcome back. As people are entering into this space here today, get out the World War II timeline. If you don't have it, it's on modules. You can certainly go there and use that for us to prepare to get started here. So, still got a few people in the waiting room. Does anybody have a question? Anyone here? No? Okay, that's good. Anybody on Zoom have a question? Phoenix. Okay. Then to get down to some of the business here, you're going to notice assignments will start locking when I say they're due. I talked to every other push teacher and world history teacher, and that's what they're doing. Have been the whole year. We cannot continue to be in the habit of turning things in 5 to 7 days late. Just because you will be grossly ill prepared for the following year. And you might as well learn to do it right now instead of putting it off, because it's going to be way worse in the future, okay? So keep that in mind. I also got very frustrated the last couple of Mondays when people were not doing the asynchronous assignments that took 20 minutes. And they were waiting 3 days later to do them or not doing them at all. That's triple to quadruple the amount of work for me when you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. So keep that in mind. I mean, I have common sense reasons for it, but I have other common sense reasons for it as well. Okay. The World War II timeline is on Canvas. This module looks like it's getting really, really long. That's okay. I had a feeling that would happen. Just to serve as a reminder for everybody, we are going to have a test this Friday. I do already have it made, so I know what the material is, and I can direct you towards that material appropriately. Well, we'll see if it shows up. Okay. That being said, though, we're going to go ahead and get moving forward. It looks like I've got 17 people here on the participants. I'm going to take a picture of that real quick so I don't have to take separate attendance. That takes forever. And we should be good. All right. So I'm curious, anybody in person or on Zoom want to tell me, how did the United States get involved in World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor? Does anybody remember? This is going back a ways here. How did the United States get involved in World War II after the attack at Pearl Harbor? Either somebody on Zoom or somebody in person kind of let us know. If not, the slides are right in front of you. So Jackson said, sent ships to somewhere in Europe. You're almost correct, Jackson. Good. Hannah. Hannah said, did they make a pact with England? They had already done that previously in what was known as the Lend-Lease Act. Probably want to remember that. But Jackson was close. They sent ships and did an amphibious landing in North Africa because they were not going to be able to attack the Germans in France because it was heavily fortified. Okay, so just a reminder on that. So that's where the United States got involved, and that turned Germany into now fighting what would be called a three-front war. Does everyone understand what that means? They're fighting in Italy and in northern Africa. They're fighting in the east in Russia, and they are fighting they're also then fighting in the west in France versus the British, okay, nominally. Okay, which really was just a battle over the skies. All right. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here to make sure we've got one person entering in here. And we're going to go from there. So the real turning point of the war, as I told you last week, World War II was when Hitler decided to invade southeast Russia, and what the city was called Stalingrad. It's actually called Volgograd today, but there it was access to the Russian oil, Soviet Union oil, and a million men got encircled at what was called Stalingrad, a million German soldiers, and by the time the city was abandoned and the war was that particular battle was over, 50,000 Germans remained out of a million, and they were taken as prisoners of war, and only 5,000 ever made their way back to Germany, meaning 45,000 men were killed just out of mistreatment, malnourishment, etc., torturing. Okay, so that was kind of a turning point, but the Soviet Union still needed the United States and Great Britain to open up a front in France. And it became a bit of a competition between Britain and the United States and the Soviet Union to see who could try to get back to Germany the fastest. Okay. If you've ever heard this term, I've used it before. It's called the high water mark. But the high water mark of the German Empire was Stalingrad and Moscow. It would not get further than that. And so this was their demise. And typically, the first attack on Nazi Germany and Europe by the Americans and by the British is known as D-Day. Okay. D-Day has no significance. It's actually called Operation Overlord. D-Day, though, is coined the term because it stands for Decision Day. They used it in code. They also used H-Day for the hour that they were going to attack. And you can see they called where the boats were going to meet up, Piccadilly Circus. If you've ever been to London, that's one of the largest train stations in London. And you can get off there. There's big markets and everything. It's very crowded. But that's where they were going to meet in the English Channel. And then from there, they were going to attack 5 separate beaches in what would be the largest amphibious attack in the history of the world. Meaning moving the most amount of people and ships onto a shore in the history of the world. Now, why is this such a big deal? Well, Hitler and the Nazis, and Hitler told Erwin Rommel to basically protect the western shores of France as much as possible. And so 2 million landmines. You guys know what those are? When you step on them, they blow up. 2 million. That's a lot of landmines were placed on the French coast. Anything that could stop an invasion, such as old cars, anything, old pieces of metal, were thrown on the shore to stop anybody from coming up the shore. And then obviously fortified bunkers were built as well. If you look on the following map that's on the screen, you're going to see the U.S. was really only invading Utah and Omaha. The British invaded Gold, Juneau, and the Canadians at Juneau, and then the British at Sword. But the most heavy fighting, where the airplanes failed to bomb the most, was at Omaha Beach. All right. And so that was where the fighting was most intense. And some of you may have seen, this is an actual primary source right here, this picture. But you have the United States for a year had been gathering supplies up in England to launch this as a surprise attack. They did they actually sent like dummies in other areas of France to try to get Germany to think that they were invading in other areas. They sent paratroopers ahead of the invasion to try to meet up with the soldiers that were advancing up the beach. And ultimately it was successful, but not with, a large amount of death. Here you can see 175,000 troops were taken on boat from England to France across the channel. I've read more like 7,000 ships, close to 6,900 and some change. And 12,000 planes were involved in the bombing and the dropping off of paratroopers. All of this with people that had zero experience. Zero. The only soldiers that we had, that really the British, the Canadians, or the United States had experience, had been the fighting in North Africa. And so, again, you're talking about a very experienced group of people. All right. Unfortunately, this year, just due to timing, we're not going to be able to watch this. I would encourage you to go on YouTube and watch the first 10 minutes of the fighting at Omaha. This was Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks recreated this in war. Those men who served in and on June 6, 1944 would say this is the most accurate depiction of what it was like. And you can see just by this picture the different amounts of materials in the water, the offensive position the Germans had, made it a pretty perilous task. Now, ultimately, it was a success. All right. And you can see on the red line, On the left-hand side, okay, you can see the troops in North Africa going up the soft underbelly of Italy. You can also see the troops then coming from Great Britain into France. Okay, and so the next mission then was to beat the Soviets to Berlin. Why do they want to beat the Soviets to Berlin? Somebody use common sense and tell me, please. Why do they want to beat the Soviets to Berlin? Hello, anybody? What does the United States and Great Britain want to do after the war is over? Control the German economy, okay, and use it to their economic advantage. So, France, Belgium, and Luxembourg within 2 months are freed from the Nazi control. Okay, and as this started happening, Hitler became more and more frenetic, distanced. He was taking morphine shots to the eye, taking speed, or what would be like today's equivalent of, like, you got some of you maybe take ADHD medicine like Vyvanse or something like that. Yeah, he was taking that regularly, gained shots of that to the eyes. Very, very strange. Had his top general, Erwin Rommel, killed, and many of his other generals killed, thinking that he was that they were basically stabbing in the back. He had multiple assassination attempts. Some of you may have seen the movie Valkyrie before. That parallels the assassination attempt of Adolf Hitler, none of which worked. All right, so within 2 months, you can see here, June 6th, okay, is the day that they landed in Normandy, France, and by August 25th, Paris was liberated, meaning that Paris was occupied from June of 1940 to August 25th of 1944. Now, Paris being the symbol of French culture, obviously, for hundreds of years, this was a big deal. And the president of the other French government, Charles de Gaulle, you can see him with his hat on here, his top hat. He is actually, here's him walking down the Champs-Élysées. And you can see the Arc de Triomphe in the background. And again, this is just a symbol that it's pretty clear that the Nazis are in retreat. Okay. The final Nazi offensive, okay, the last ditch effort was known as the Battle of the Bulge. All right. Now we're gonna take a moment here and we're gonna stop. I'll explain the Battle of the Bulge in a second. But I wanted everybody to get this opportunity here. So we are going
hello,
to
my name is Eston Dickerson.
share the screen here.
Teach economics and government.
We're going to watch
my 13th year here.
Mr. Dickerson talking about engaging students.
Also for that 4 years as a student. So 17 years total if you want to add it up. And one of the things that I use when I engage the kids is similarity of interest. And that is sharing hobbies, sports, or other things that you like.
Wearing the same
that are
jacket.
Similar to a particular student's interest. Also sharing social causes that you are passionate about.
And we're going to stop there. Let's everybody give Mr. Dixon a round of applause. He's a YouTube star and influencer. Hey,
Wow,
10 views. I know. All right. Thank you, everybody on Zoom. I was planning that all day today, and he set himself up for it perfectly, which makes me chuckle at the least. Maybe even laugh out loud, LOL.
I'm making happier than his wife. Wait, what? That's so weird.
Dude, that's so weird. Don't say that out loud. Okay, I need to actually do some work, though. All right, so Hitler's last offensive was known as the Battle of the Bulge. If you look at the map, clearly here was what Hitler's top generals, again, he was down to like very little leadership because he had gotten rid of most of his top brass. But they tried to drive a wedge. They thought they could drive a wedge between the British troops in the north and the United States troops in the south. And if you look in the middle of this, which I'm going to get my little annotator thing out, just fun. If you look in the middle of this right here, this is called I don't speak French, Bastogne. But this is where Patton basically became very famous as well in northern Africa because there was an entire regiment of U.S. troops that were stuck in this bulge. And so Patton was called upon to leave. I think he was down here in Arlennes, and he was able to come up here and free the men. And one of the reasons why this was so perilous is these are mostly U.S. troops, is why we hear more about it. And secondly, these troops were wearing their summer uniforms. Okay, when you invade in June of 1944, you're wearing your summer uniforms. You're now stuck in the middle of France, and it was a cold winter, kind of like we just experienced.
Your summer uniforms a little more friendly, a little more.
And yeah, they were basically had turned into trench warfare because it was so cold outside and there were so few places. This was the same exact area that World War I had been fought in. And so obviously the American and British resolve was able to overcome Hitler's last offensive, but this is where he would burn out most of his oil. And this is pretty much it. Those are stylists.
You're trying to I don't see students, and these kids aren't giving me anything. You're not helping.
I have a long day today, so.
You know what you need?
What's that? Okay, that helps. You need to get up out the house.
Bro, I can't.
What? Okay, he's trying to distract us again. So, after the Battle of the Bulge, all right, it was fairly evident that the Nazis were going to lose, and they had no chance because the Soviet Union was crunching in on them from the east. The United States and Britain were crunching in from the west. The United States were also coming in up through Italy. Mussolini had basically been taken out of office and jailed in 1943. And so in a place called Yalta, you want to write this one down. Who do you see in this picture? You see Churchill, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was in his fourth term as U.S. president. Can you do that anymore? No, and that's because of him. And that's, again, why some people, again, conspiracists will say, oh, well, he acted like a dictator because he served for 4 terms. He broke the George Washington rule. But either way, someone had to lead our country. And then you see Stalin here on the right-hand side of the picture, okay? And so they meet in Yalta. Yalta is a very interesting place. It was the location of the summer residence and like summer vacation resort of the Romanov family. It's on the Black Sea. It's actually where the Olympics were hosted. When Russia hosted the last two Winter Olympics ago, which was the Winter Olympics, when they got caught cheating, you guys remember that? That was right outside of Yalta. Every person, so all the entourage of these these world leaders that showed up, everyone got bed bugs because no one had stayed in these palaces since the Romanovs had been murdered, assassinated, which is disgusting. And there were secret police everywhere. And so FDR and Churchill said that Stalin needs a buffer zone between them, like communism and the rest of Europe. And so they want to turn FDR and Stalin want spheres of influence in a weak Germany, and Churchill wants a strong Germany so that Stalin won't be able to just take it and abuse it. All right? There's some irony behind this. I know this sounds like a lot of names, but basically nobody is getting along here, and they're about to end a world war. And this is when the tension starts between the United States and the Soviet Union. Most of you, I think, are aware that this would create a phenomenon known as the Cold War, okay, which we'll talk about after this. But the tension starts early in 45 because the Germans had decimated the Soviet Union, killed off a quarter of its people, whereas the United States had remained barely untouched just at Pearl Harbor. Does that make sense? So there's some animosity there by Stalin thinking that U.S. shouldn't be able to just run in and argue for whatever they want. This also then is the World Conference where FDR proposes, and he had the backing of Churchill, what's called the United Nations, which would replace what? The League of Nations and the weak Treaty of Versailles. Exactly. All right, so in the meantime, Mussolini and his mistress, Claretta Petacci, are caught trying to flee to the border of Switzerland, right by Lake Como. They are shot, and then their bodies are hung in the middle of the middle square part of the city of Milan, where there's one of the most beautiful Gothic cathedrals at anywhere, called the Duomo there, the Dome. They are hung, their bodies are just hung, and people just start taking swipes at them in the middle of the square. Mussolini had worn thin on the Italians. They didn't like him. And so he is dead. That's one totalitarian leader dead. And this race to Germany ends in the United States and the Soviet Union meeting at what's known as the Elbe River, okay, in April 25th, 1945. The Elbe River will be the divide between East and West Germany all the way until 1989. Everyone understand that? Okay. You don't see pictures like this very often. That's why Mr. Brunette has dramatic irony on the screen. You don't see a U.S. soldier embracing a Soviet soldier for very much long after this. In fact, it's pretty much assumed that within 6 months of this, World War III could have broken out and almost did. Patton was stationed in Munich, bordering this, basically the Elbe River, ready to attack, and was put on full alert. They didn't like each other. Okay. Now, why did the U.S. get beat to Berlin? We'll talk about that in a second. VE Day, one that you want to write on your timeline. VE Day is May 8th, 1945. Celebrated around the world. Okay. And VE stands for Victory in Europe. Okay, VE Day, Victory in Europe. Okay, May 8th, 1945. Again, this is when Hitler had committed suicide in his underground bunker, basically about 300 yards or a stone's throw from the Brandenburg Gate, right outside of Potsdamer Platz in Berlin. And Germany was a train wreck. They had tried to fight with veteran forces and children forces to keep it going. Hitler refused to surrender, thus causing incredible amounts of damage. And due to the way that the Nazis treated the Soviet Union in their advance into Russia and the Soviet Union, it was worse. And so for an entire month, the entire month of April and even into May, the Soviet Union, the generals told their soldiers to treat the women and any remaining survivors worse than their own were treated. So women were raped, children were raped. And there was nothing stopping absolute carnage. Okay. The United States was not in Berlin and had nothing to do with this. Okay. Because the United States sprinted south And Patton and Eisenhower sprinted south to save Stuttgart and Munich. You maybe have heard of Stuttgart before, because that's where they make Mercedes-Benz. That's where Bosch is made. Okay, Bavaria, obviously you've heard of the car company BMW before, or Volkswagen. Okay, or maybe camera companies like Carl Zeiss. Okay, this was where the money was. And so the United States, in a capitalistic economy, knowing how much economics would matter moving forward, they said, we're getting to southern Germany. And so they took the gamble. They gave the capital to the Soviets in order to save the South. That's a big payoff. Do we have those companies in the United States today? Yes, we do. Absolutely. Are they a huge part of our economy? Absolutely. We have a big BMW car plant down by Cincinnati that's actually in Indiana. Yes, we do. Okay. So part of that, again, that globalization factor has to do with the end of World War II. It's a lot of people don't realize. Volkswagen, is made in Ravensburg, I believe, or Wolfsburg. Ravensburg is Audi, sorry. Wolfsburg is Volkswagen. That's Hitler's car. Literally, Hitler made the car to try to get average Germans to buy a car and make it affordable. Today, it's still driven all over the place. I bet you didn't know that. Exactly. It's kind of creepy to think about it if you really dive into it. Now, with the war won in Germany and in Europe, they weren't done with their pitter patter about who was going to do what, but the United States could now focus on Japan, and so the focus on Japan, as they get closer and closer to the actual invasion, is this, and that is, it was assumed that it would take 1 million casualties, 1 million U.S. men between the ages of 18 and 35 would have to die to invade the mainland of Japan. 5,000 men died on D-Day. There were less than 4,000 casualties in Pearl Harbor, the attack on Pearl Harbor. I believe the attack on 9/11 was like 8 to 9. Okay. The coronavirus milestone just hit 500,000 yesterday. If you were paying attention to that, our flags are at half staff outside. 500, that's 500,000. It was reckoned, and it was by American generals, it was generally considered that it would cost a minimum of 1 million lives to invade Japan. Every single citizen was taught to yield a weapon, a stabbing spear. Women were trained to use stabbing spears. Children were trained in school to use stabbing spears. The emperor had gone completely underground, and they were ready to dig in as much as possible. And so the taking of 2 islands that were close to Japan called Iwo Jima and Okinawa were a major milestone in the United States being able to bomb Japan 24 hours a day to try to get their people to surrender. Does everyone understand that? So similar tactics that Hitler used in the Luftwaffe used in the battle for Britain. But to take these islands, some of you have probably seen this symbol before. Okay, when I look at it right here. Okay, there's a book called Flag of Our Fathers and a movie written about it as well. And this is generally considered by about 99.9% of people to be a staged picture, as in they came back and retook it. But this picture was used to sell war bonds so that the military would have more money to sell or to produce bombs and whatnot to try to continue the war fighting the war. Sorry. What made the fighting so difficult, and usually I'll watch more video clips on this, is the fact that these were volcanic islands where there were tunnels and there were caves, and the Japanese had taken the offensive parts of the island early on and dug themselves into it and basically committed their entire life, willing to make ritualistic suicide a option, even in the fighting on these islands. Okay, so if that meant running into U.S. troops with the bomb, with the grenade and killing 8-10 people, it was worth it. So that's what made it so challenging to take those 2 islands, and that's why you hear a lot about this. If you hear old timers talk about World War II fighting, they'll say that the South Pacific might have been even worse the fighting than in the Battle of the Bulge or in D-Day. Okay, and that's why. All right, so some of you have probably heard me say this before. If you were an American stationed on a ship in the South Pacific and the war was almost over, and you had to sit here and wonder if a plane was going to come out of the sky and run itself into your ship, you would be constantly in a state of paranoia, I promise you. I can't even imagine what it would feel like. Okay, kamikaze pilots became basically the Japanese used them as a means of fighting when they ran out of bombs and they ran out of torpedoes and they ran out of oil. They then said, well, we're just going to use our pilots to commit suicide and fly into American ships. And what they would do is they would fly into the part of the ship that had the bombs and had bullets and stuff located in it so that it would cause explosions. Okay? Those explosions then would rip holes in ships, cause them to have to be repaired, etc., trying to slow down the American onslaught of Japan. Now, fast forward from February to July of 1945, and the game changes. How does the game change? Well, look at the picture, folks. Picture says 1,000 words. In this instance, probably 20,000 words. We no longer have a Winston Churchill as the British Prime Minister. We have Clement Attlee. What happened to Churchill? He was a hero. Well, Britain had not had elections since 1935. They had an election in July of 45, and his party was no longer the majority party, which meant he was no longer the prime minister. Does that make sense? Just like Hitler got to be the prime minister because the Nazi party won the most seats in 1932, Churchill was taken away, removed from his position. Even though he was still in the parliament, he was no longer the prime minister. And Clement Attlee was very much a liberal politician, anti-war and in favor of decolonization and getting rid of the British Empire, which we'll talk about a little bit tomorrow. Who's the guy sitting next to Clement Attlee? Looks exactly like his description. That is Harry S. Truman. He is a peanut farmer from Missouri. Springfield, Missouri. Now, I can't go all that far because he did go to Harvard, okay, or Princeton, I forget which one of the two. Okay, but he was what you call a lame duck vice president. Mike Pence. Anyways, he he did not know what was going on. He wasn't even aware that the United States was prepping to make an atomic bomb at the University of Chicago on a handball court. Handball court, just had to throw it out there because, handball courts are kind of cool in history, right? Think National Assembly. Anyways, so he didn't even know about the Manhattan Project until he gets to this meeting. And he had been in office, I believe, for less than a month, maybe 30 days. And you see Joseph Stalin looking real chipper there because he's now the eldest of the politicians, and he's going to attempt to get his way. Potsdam is a very historically significant place. This is the home of Kaiser Wilhelm I, Kaiser Wilhelm II, and the Prussian capital of Prussia, Potsdam, okay? It's also then the place where these people meet and they agree to make a historically significant decision to divide up Germany into 4 occupied zones. This one you want to jot down. It's going to come back again. Okay, but Germany is divided into 4 zones: a British zone, an American zone, a French zone, and a Russian zone. How different is this than the end of World War I? Very different, right? The United States, in particular, Truman was walking around saying, basically, I've got this big thing in my back pocket, and I might be using it soon. Little did he know, the Soviets had already copied 6 months earlier the plans in Los Alamos in New Mexico, and they were already designing an atomic bomb because there were secret KGB spies in the United States, and the plans had been leaked, and it was really not a secret. Does that make sense to everybody? And so this being a very important conference, and the reason why the A-bomb I'm going to mention is important because the United States did not want the Soviet Union taking Korea. Okay, we're going to come back to this in a few days. They will end up, and look at what Korea is today. What is it? Half communist, half not communist. Half command economy, half more open economy. Exactly. We trade a lot with one of them, don't we? We have a crap ton of, excuse my language, Korean cars around and Korean technology. I have LG TV in my room. Thank you, Korea, South Korea, not North Korea. All right, so take a look. This is Germany. These are the 4 zones. Okay, and if you were in my room right now, in fact, I might be able to put it up here a little bit. Turn it. Okay, if you look on my screen, if any of you are looking at me in the upper left-hand corner, that's a picture of Berlin. Okay, so Germany was divided up like you see on the board. Okay, 4 zones. I told you the Americans wanted this zone due to the amount of companies and prosperity in this area. Okay, but Berlin, if you look up here, was divided into East and West Berlin. And not actually East and West Berlin. Berlin was divided up into 4 zones as well. But as you'll see next week, at the beginning of the Cold War in the 50s, the British, the French, and the Americans combined their zone to make it West Germany, the Republic of West Germany. This is the Republic of East Germany, is the Soviet zone. Here's that river I was telling you, the Elbe. And then Berlin became divided into East and West Berlin as well. So what's weird about this is you have a little island in the middle of the Soviet zone, okay? That's where that square is on the map. That island was split up between the 4 countries as well. And so that's why that should make sense next week when I talk about the Berlin airlift and when JFK says the famous quote, "I am a jelly donut." All right, it will all make sense if you're actually paying attention right now. Okay, if you're not, the jelly donut's just gonna be a bad joke. Okay. All right. Let's move on then. So, the United States flies in, millions of pamphlets into Japanese cities, warning them that something horrible is going to happen. One, the firebombing of Tokyo. Tokyo is one of the most densely populated areas in the world. The United States firebombed Tokyo at the end of July, causing 300-foot tall waves of fire racing through the city. If you don't know what it means to firebomb, it's when a bomb lands and bounces, continues to create a wave of fire that just rip roars through a city, decimating people and buildings that are in between it. Okay. Over 300 plus thousand people die in a 3-day bombing raid on Tokyo. The United States did the same thing in Dresden in Germany because Hitler would not surrender. Highly controversial, something that had we lost the war, we would have been paying for. We might have had war crimes against us. If I'm being completely honest, you can go to Dresden and see see the pictures. I've been there. It's insane. Well, Japanese got it worse because not only did the emperor refuse to surrender because the military wouldn't let him, but the people were told not to flee. And so 2 medium-sized cities were bombed. When I say medium-sized, they're really, I'm going to compare them to the size of, there are about 350,000 people in these cities. Okay. Fort Wayne has 200,000 people. Marion County has 1.5 million in the surrounding suburbs. So put that on for size. I mean, we're talking like I don't even know, man, like an Ann Arbor, not Chicago, not LA, not Houston, not Dallas. We didn't drop these on the biggest places, but they worked anyways. Nagasaki, everyone remembers Nagasaki, right? That was a port where the Dutch had their separate island made. That no longer exists. That's why I can't find pictures of it. Because atomic bomb destroyed. Look at the results. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner, okay, this is a picture of Hiroshima. I mean, it's almost hard to believe. Nothing exists. It was so hot at the epicenter of this that things just vanished, disintegrated. Yes. Yeah, so there's again, I haven't been there, but I've heard that Reddit a few times where people's silhouettes are on the ground because their body disintegrated so quickly. Here you can see the actual footage of the plane and the mushroom cloud that was created from the atomic bomb. The first one that was dropped, you can see 70,000 people were just burned alive immediately. 70K. And millions, said hundreds of thousands of millions of people have been affected afterwards due to the radiation. Okay, here's Nagasaki. You can see what it looks like. These were industrial cities. Again, not super heavily populated. The people were warned well ahead of time to get out, but the government did not tell them to do that, told them to stay. Again, just to wrap your head around this. So the Japanese emperor surrendered, and VJ Day, which, since you know what VE means, you know what VJ means now. That's victory in Japan. That occurred on August 14th, 1945. And there's some dramatic irony in this picture as well. This is on the USS Missouri. It was one of the ships that was sunk at Pearl Harbor. It was resurrected. General Douglas MacArthur, who was the governor of the Philippines, who was forced to flee to Australia and led the United States troops in island hopping back to Japan, is the presiding general here, along with Chester Nimitz. And this is the emperor right here signing basically the agreement to end the war and signing a piece of paper saying that he is no longer inviolable. He is no longer sacred. Okay, and this was one of the huge points of contention with the United States at the end of the war. Was they didn't want to ruin the Japanese people forever, but they were not going to let them continue to practice state Shintoism. And so it is still technically illegal to practice Shintoism in Japan today. Now, do people do it in their houses? Of course. Do they worship their ancestors? Of course they do. Some of that tends to move in with their Confucian and Buddhist ideals, right? That have in the religions that had migrated there over time, but they are not allowed to worship the emperor himself. So this is always an interesting statistic to look at, I think. Here you see World War II casualties in Europe. Each one of these symbols represents 100,000 people. So the skulls indicate basically just civilians. The stars of David indicate Jews. And you're going to see, for example, the civilians died in Germany due to the bombing. Look at how bad Poland civilians got it. Look at the Soviet Union. Their military and their civilians combined, along with the amount of Jews that were murdered in the Holocaust. Look at Nazi Germany in Soviet Union. A lot of this was the Battle of Stalingrad. Okay, and then you look at the fringe, these newly created countries, and all the Jews that had been killed. You see the Greek civilians that were killed by the Nazis, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So that just hopefully you're thinking in your head, because we talked about World War I not that long ago, that this creates a lot of problems, social, political problems. This one always got me a little bit worked up too. And this is, look at China. Okay, this is the Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party. And then this is the Communist Party, Mao's party. You'll see that the Kuomintang took a lot more casualties, but look at the civilian death rate in China. Here you can see Okinawa. You see why I told you the fighting was so intense. 500,000 Japanese, 100,000 Americans on a small island. And then you've got civilian casualties. Look at the Philippines, Bataan Death March. Bengal. So look how many people got starved to death making food for the British Army. Okay, and then you see Japan. Civilian deaths due to bombing at the end of the war. All right, so in 1946, the United Nations is created. All right, and this time around, they were going to create basically a much more controlled organization where they were going to have a general assembly where it was representation based off of every country having a vote. And then there was going to be a Security Council. And on the Security Council would be 5 permanent countries: the USSR, France, the Kuomintang in China, not the communists, Great Britain, and the USA. And then there would be countries that would float in and out of the Security Council every few years, like every 2 years, so that it wouldn't be just these 5 countries. It would be other countries participating. Also, the United Nations had a court where they could try people. That's in The Hague today. They had a Economic and Social Council where they looked at, the world's monetary supply, and they advised countries on what to do. And obviously, it still exists today. And you saw one of their biggest things that they did in the 2000s was the Paris Peace Accords, which tried to bring down emissions and pollution in every country. President Donald Trump backed out of that, but Biden is putting the United States back into it. And so that was kind of controversial. That's and then if you go on their website today, you can look, they're totally committed to the coronavirus response right now and trying to figure out how to bring the world back to a place where it's open again. We'll talk more about that later. This is always very interesting, but I'm running out of time. So the Nuremberg trials, basically only 22 Nazis were put to trial right after the war. And these were the biggest brass, the biggest Nazis. 12 got death sentences, 7 prison sentences, 3 were acquitted, meaning they didn't take guilt. And one of them committed suicide with a cyanide pill in the prison. Okay, if you go online, you can look at the actual gym where they were hung in Nuremberg. This was, remember, the cap, like where they did the party rallies. If you watched the documentary with me in class. Though other countries staged their own trials. And around Europe, there were 60,000 Nazis that were put on trial and in jail, but almost every single one of them was out of jail by 1955. Okay. There were a lot of people around Europe that got punished for collaborating with the Nazis. For example, in France, 20,000 women had their head shaved for sleeping with Nazis. Okay, as a punishment. Okay, you can see pictures of that as well if you look at it. In Tokyo war crimes trial, which happened about a year after. Hold on, folks. The United States used their biochemical experiments they did on the Chinese people, and we did not punish them for it because we use those to advance our own scientific interests. Hideki Tojo, though, you see right here, was assassinated or was put on trial and killed for his crimes against humanity. All right, we made it through there. I wanted to show you real quick what your homework is. I appreciate you sticking around for this whole thing. I'm going to take the screen share now and show everybody what the homework is. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I have not been able to get it on the module yet. So if you go to assignments, it says 223 at the top of the assignment. It says decolonization. Click on it. There's a Google Doc. And basically, all you're going to do is go in and take 5 to 6 bullet points of notes from pages 781 to 789. Some of you might have read this already, on the path to decolonization for these 7 countries, India, Pakistan together, okay? Questions from the Zoomers on this? Okay, upload this by 10 a.m. tomorrow. I think I put 10:15. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the share then. And everybody have a great day on Zoom. Thank you for participating.